right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I am your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is an Analytics Tuesday where we'll be looking at the PFF grades as well as talking about whether rookie tight end Kyle Pitts is poised to break the record of Mike Ditka set 50 years ago for a rookie tight end this upcoming weekend, now that he's dealing with a hamstring injury.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, we always thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, as well as now free and available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So today's episode is an Analytics Tuesday. I will be having a guest on tomorrow's episode as opposed to today's episode due to scheduling. So we will do what we have done several times over the last, 6 weeks or so when we haven't had a guest on, for Tuesday's episodes where, I will sit here and go through the Pro Football Focus grades and sort of talk about the things that jump out to me. And that will cause us once again to go back and revisit the offensive line. Yes, we will take a quick trip to Kayla McGarry Island, but we'll also be talking about Chris LIndstrom and how he had a bounce back performance against this Buffalo Bills team in week 17. We'll talk about AJ Terrell's time as a shadow corner, seeing that for the first time this season against this Bills team, and talk about his PFF grades as well. But we'll start things off talking not about PFF grades, but we'll talk about Kyle Pitts and the fact that Kyle Pitts is poised potentially in week 18 against the New Orleans Saints to break Mike Ditka's all-time record for most receiving yards for a rookie tight end set 50 years ago. And, Kyle Pitts is dealing with some injury issues. And so let's jump into whether or not Kyle Pitts is going to break that record. We didn't talk about this on yesterday's episode. But yeah, Kyle Pitts now with his team leading 69 yards receiving on 2 catches against Buffalo in the first half of that game. He's over 1,000 yards receiving this season. He's now 59 yards away from eclipsing that record set by Mike Ditka way back in 1961 for most receiving yards. And, where he's at right now is a great accomplishment. He's already surpassed Julio Jones in terms of rookie pass catchers in a Falcons uniform in a single season for most yards receiving. He's already surpassed Tony Gonzalez, Hall of Famer Tony Gonzalez, for the most receiving yards for any tight end, rookie or veteran, in a Falcons uniform. And he has an opportunity to get the record this week. But it's going to be a question of whether he'll get that because he's dealing with that hamstring injury that he suffered late in the second quarter against the Bills. And call me Mr. Pessimism, although I prefer the term Mr. Skepticism. Mr. Pessimism is my father. But Mr. Skepticism, I'm that way because of what Arthur Smith kind of said on Monday in his media press conference when talking about Kyle Pitts' status. And he's the usual Arthur Smith way. He's vague about injury information. On Sunday, when people ask him questions, any updates on injury, I'll give you an update on Monday. And then when Monday comes, he doesn't give you any updates. I see what you're up to, Arthur Smith. But he basically said he's not ruling him out today for later this week, which doesn't sound particularly optimistic about his status for Sunday. If it was just like a minor hamstring tweak, you would think he'd be like, oh, maybe he's day to day or something like that. And we'll give you an update later in the week or whatever the case may be. But it seemed like, at least from my eyes or my ears, I guess you could say, that sounds like he's doubtful to play. He's going to be listed as questionable going into the week, and we'll obviously have to monitor it as the week goes by. But we know that hamstring injuries are notorious for not being things that are quick to heal. Obviously, we've experienced that. Titans fans have experienced that over the last 2 years with Julio Jones. So we'll just have to sort of see what Pitts' status is later on this week. But it seems like to me, again, because I'm Mr. Skepticism, um, it seems like we might have to settle for Kyle Pitts being second best when it comes to breaking that record. And, a lot of people are going to sit here and say, well, Ditka did it in 14 games. And of course he did, because he went to Pitt. He's the greatest institution on the face of the planet. And, Pitt just produces nothing but Hall of Famers. Go ahead, look it up. It's true. But like, of course Ditka did it at some unprecedented level because he went to Pitt. It's Hall of Famer. Um, but like I sit here and say, like, who cares how many games it took Ditka to do it? The fact of the matter is that Kyle Pitts sitting here with 1,018 yards is significantly more than any other tight end has produced as a rookie in 16 games, right? And the NFL's been playing 16 game seasons for what, 43 years. So you have my permission to continue to refer to the season that Kyle Pitts has this season, whether he breaks Ditka's record or not, as a historic season, because it is historic. It's the best season that a rookie tight end has had in 43 years. If that doesn't fit the definition of historic, I don't know what does. We're just basically asking the question, do we add another, 20 years to that to get back to Ditka? But, I think I say that because I know some of you, and I've talked to some of you recently, that are still sort of on the fence about the whole notion of whether or not Kyle Pitts was a good pick. And my first response to that is, don't get too caught up in trying to decide whether a player is a good pick 16 games or even 6 games into their career. I don't think that's generally a good decision. Time obviously will tell on all these issues, and we'll better have more information on that a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. But I do bring this up because we're now at the end of this season and we're about to enter a new season, which is draft season. And I know so many of you guys get super draft assesses and you do the thing despite all the things I say, and you'll build up this draft pick, this number 1 draft selection that's coming up in a couple of months to be the end all be all. If the Falcons just draft this one player, it's going to save everything. And I said it last year when it was talking about Pitts, when it was talking about Fields. Don't get too caught up in this one pick determining the fate of this regime. It's 1 out of 20 or so picks that this regime is potentially going to make. And the collective whole of all 20 of those picks will determine the fate of this franchise moving forward for the next 5 to 10 years, rather than this one pick. So I have to stress that, because I know you guys are going to get in your pre-draft frenzy. As you do, you're not going to hear this. Most of this, what I'm saying right now, is going to fall on deaf ears again. But I'm hoping that maybe I reach a few of you guys to not put so much stock into this one draft selection, and not to try to sit here and say, based off of Kyle Pitts' rookie season, historic or not, that whether or not this is going to be the draft pick that changes the fate and decides the leads the Falcons to salvation or frustration, as I think a lot of you tend to do. And the example I used last year when I was talking about this exact subject was Aaron Donald. Now, Aaron Donald is inarguably the best defensive player in the NFL. It's been that way for 5 years running. So there's no doubt that anybody questions Aaron Donald's impact on the team. That's evidenced by the fact that if you look at Football Outsiders defensive DVO rankings, the Rams have consistently had one of the best defenses in the league ever since Aaron Donald entered the league in 2014. So 6 out of the last 8 years, the Rams have had a top 10 defense according to DVOA. You compare that to the previous 8 years without Aaron Donald, they only finished in the top 10 twice. In those 2 outlier seasons where they had Donald and didn't finish in the top 10 were 2016 and 2018. Their defense finished 17th and 16th respectively. But the thing I noted when I went back and looked at those years was that, you can make a pretty strong argument that the reason why their defense took a dip in those years was because their secondary was not as good in those years as it had been in other years. And you can also look at this current season for the Rams and the defensive improvement they've shown in the second half. And obviously, Von Miller certainly has an impact on that. You can maybe even argue he has the most impact on that. But, I've also noticed that, you look at some of the stuff, particularly the PFF grades that we'll get into later talking about this Falcons team. But it seems like every, or several of the defensive backs not named Jalen Ramsey have had market improvements in their game over the last 6 to 8 games or whatever the case has been. And so, you can take that information and say, hey, does that mean that it's better to build back the front? Because even with a dominant player like Aaron Donald, even the Rams' fate seems to be decided by their secondary play. I mean, that's one way to interpret that information. But the larger point, however you interpret that information, is that, even the world's best player is not the end all be all. And it still takes the other 10 guys that play beside him, to make a meaningful impact on in this game. And so you can make the argument that the other 10 guys collectively make even a bigger impact than that one guy does. That's the larger point. It's to prove this point that don't get too wrapped up in the saviors or the scapegoats when it comes to one player. Stop building up these draft picks to be those things. Whether we're talking about Aaron Donald, Kyle Pitts, Justin Fields, or whoever. And even to me, as someone who's been a big critic of Jalen Mayfield, and some of you may think I make Jalen Mayfield out to be a scapegoat. And, I bring up Jalen Mayfield because we're going to talk about the offensive line coming up on today when we get into the analytics portion of today's episode. But I bring that up not because I think, Jalen Mayfield's a scapegoat. And if we upgrade the left guard position, all of our offensive line will suddenly be good. No, I sit here and think if we upgrade the left guard position, then our offensive line probably will be 20% better because it's 1 out of 5 spots that we've upgraded. It doesn't mean that the other spots are automatically going to get better. And then if the offensive line improves by 30 or 40%, it's probably because other players like Matt Hennessy, Kayla McGary, or whoever else got better, or the Falcons upgraded those spots as well. Right? You know, it just if you're solving the left guard position, you're solving one problem. And if you need to solve other problems, you need to solve those other problems. Ideally, you can solve, 3 or 4 or more problems, particularly when it comes to the offensive line. But one guy who isn't a problem, that's Chris LIndstrom. And we'll talk about his rebound performance coming up on the podcast. And we'll also take a quick trip to Kayla Mcgarry, but not in terms of talking about Kayla Mcgarry, or at least we'll talk a little bit about Kayla Mcgarry's pass blocking, but we'll talk a lot about Kayla Mcgarry's improved run blocking, and maybe that holds a key to things moving forward. So we'll get into that. But, in addition to talking about that, let's talk about ways that you can save money at the pump. I know many of you were traveling this holiday season and you spent a lot of money on gas. Those of you that live in and around the city of Atlanta, you know how atrocious that traffic is and how much money you burn filling up the tank each and every day. So why not get some cash back so that you can save at the pump? You now can with a new app called Get Upside. It's a free app. When you open a free account at Get Upside, you get 25 cents back per gallon every time you fill up. Over time, that kind of savings can start to add up. Some people make as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back with Get Upside. That's $200 to $300 that you can put directly into your bank account. You can use PayPal. I like to use and transfer Get Upside money cash back into Amazon gift cards. And now when you open an account and use our special promo code Touchdown, you'll get an additional 25 cents back per gallon. That's a bonus 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents back per gallon. So don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Download the free Get Upside app, available on the App Store or Google Play, and use that promo code Touchdown when you sign up. That's Get Upside, promo code Touchdown, to start saving every time you fill up. So let's get into the Analytics Tuesday portion of today's episode, and let's talk about Chris LIndstrom, who was the highest graded player on the Falcons offense, according to PFF this week, with an 86.8 grade. And it was nice to see a bounce back performance for Chris LIndstrom. We've talked about in recent games where Chris LIndstrom has had a subpar stretch of games, starting with that Week 13 game against the Bucs, where he struggled, particularly in pass protection. And if you look at this season based off of PFF's charting, Chris LIndstrom has been credited overall this season with 30 pressures allowed this year, but over half of them, 16 of which, came in a 4-game stretch, starting with that Bucs game, the Panthers, the 49ers, and Lions games. And you also look at the amount of quarterback hits he's given up this year, 8 of which, and 5 of them also came during that 4-game stretch. So it was a rough 4-game stretch as far as Chris LIndstrom goes in terms of pass protection. We've talked a little bit about, speculating on what reasons could have been behind that. We also know, come to find out that he's suffered a recent tragedy in his life involving the death of his mother. I don't think it's fair to speculate as whether or not that had an impact on his performance or whatever the case may be. So I'll leave that alone. But it's certainly good to see Chris LIndstrom looking like the Chris LIndstrom in this Bills game that we saw for the first 12 weeks of the season and playing like an elite guard that was very deserving of being voted to the Pro Bowl this year. So good to see him. We'll see what he does later this week. Speaking of PFF grades on the offensive line, guess who graded out as one of the 3 best offensive tackles in week 17 in terms of run blocking? Yes, we're going back to the old decrepit vacation home at Kayla McGary Island. Kayla McGary earned a 92.4 run blocking grade, aka an elite grade, against this Bills team. He also earned a 52.5 pass blocking grade, which is far from elite, very much below average in that regard. He finished 3rd on the team in terms of pass blocking grades against the Bills. But, given the struggles that the Falcons offensive line had against this Bills team, they gave up 53% pressure on Matt Ryan's dropbacks, which was the highest of any team so far in week 17. Obviously, we got one more game to play on Monday Night Football as of this recording. And so, Jake Matthews, Jalen Mayfield, Matt Hennessy, and Kaleb McGary all struggled in pass protection. Chris LIndstrom was the only one that graded out well in pass protection. McGary, while he was top 3 in run blocking grade this year, he was like bottom 5 in pass blocking grades. But again, Jake Matthews was also pretty low. He was, McGary was 57th out of 61 offensive tackles this weekend. Jake Matthews was 52nd out of 61. So bottom 10. And Kaleb McGary was bottom 5. So it's interesting when you compare those two, and the reason why we're comparing those two, obviously we know Jake Matthews is much better pass blocker than Kaleb McGary was, but it's interesting because you look at McGary's raw stats, and he was credited by PFF of giving up 2 sacks and 2 hurries, while Jake Matthews was only giving up 2 hurries. So why is there only a marginal difference between the 2 grades? And I think in part because PFF probably didn't kill Kaleb McGary for at least one of those sacks. I don't know about the other ones. But at least one of those sacks, he probably was not given a particularly poor grade on that play, even though he was rightfully credited with giving up the sack. We're talking about that Greg Rousseau sack strip that happened at the end of the first quarter, where Rousseau was able to loop around Kaleb McGary, but McGary kind of did the right thing by forcing that speed rush to go wide around the pocket and behind the quarterback, where generally speaking, you're coached, if you're a pass rusher, you're not able to make a play if you're behind the quarterback. You need to be at least in front of the quarterback, or on the quarterback, or between him and where the receiver is to make a play on the football. But Rousseau was able to continue wide around the pocket and chase down Matt Ryan from behind, resulting in that sack strip, largely due to Matt Ryan not having a clear path to step up in the pocket due to the pressure allowed from Jalen Mayfield on that particular play, where he was beat by Harrison Phillips, who I think finished this game with like 5 or 6 pressures, a team high for the Bills. And Harrison Phillips is not necessarily known for being a prolific pass rusher. And so that was reflected in Jalen Mayfield's grade, where he was given a pass blocking grade of 8, not 80, 8 by PFF, which was without a doubt the lowest of any NFL player in week 17. And I would be surprised if someone eclipses that on Monday night. So, we're not picking on Jalen Mayfield at this point in time because everything that has been said or could be said about Jalen Mayfield has been said at this point in time. But it is notable that you see another one of these extremely low graded games from Jalen Mayfield again against the Bills. And he's had, when you look at sort of graded games, when you compare Jalen Mayfield to Kaleb McGary, Kaleb McGary has had 3 games where his pass blocking grade has been below 40. And 40 is basically where you, at least based off of PFF's grade, where you go from orange to red. So anything below 40 is bad, right? We would say. McGary's had 3 of those games this season. Jalen Mayfield's had now 8, with Buffalo being his 8th game. And then you have like 3 more games where it's very orange, where he's below 50, which again is well below average. Kaleb McGary's had 3 games where he's graded out in the 40, so below 50. But what's interesting, in contrast to these poor pass blocking performances, Kaleb McGary has graded out really well as a run blocker these last 6 or so games based off PFF's grades, dating back to that week 12 game. Taken as a whole, these last 6 games collectively compared to other run tackles in the NFL, he is graded out, according to them, as the second best run blocking tackle in the NFL, behind the Falcons legend Tom Compton, who's now the starting right tackle for the 49ers, barely ahead of Trent Williams, the starting left tackle for the 49ers, who's been, a dominant run blocker throughout the season. And that's largely owed to, two elite games from Kayla McGary this week and also the Carolina game. We noted after that Carolina game how well Kayla McGary blocked in that game. We'll see what the film says with Kayla McGary's performance this week. As I've noted several times on the podcast when we've talked a little bit about Matt Hennessy's high run blocking grades, I don't always necessarily agree with PFF's assessment of who's playing at a high level as a run blocker. We talked about this with Jalen Mayfield having a super high run blocking grade, and I think with that Dallas game for basically garbage time production or whatever the case may be. So it's always a little wonky looking at some of these run blocking grades. So we'll double check the film to sort of see how it goes. And one of the projects I do plan on doing after the end of the season is to go back through all the run blocking snaps and grade the offensive line by myself. And maybe I'll come away thinking, oh, like PFF got it right. Or maybe I'll come back and think, oh, PFF got it very, very wrong. I generally don't give PFF a hard time when it comes to the pass protection and the pass rushing stuff, because I learned like back in 2018 when I was, keeping a tab on that stuff, that where I sort of put various Falcon players on sort of my own charting of pressures and sacks and all that stuff was pretty much, one or two off where PFF had. So I generally sort of assume that they're pretty spot on that, because the past has told me that our perspectives on that are not too dissimilar. So I generally trust their pass rushing stuff and pass protection stuff more so than anything else. But speaking of the run blocking success that Kaleb McGary has, let's talk a little bit about the run blocking success the team had, because usually on the rapid reaction episodes, I talk about the team's success running left or running right, because, that's been a running gag on the show, I guess you could say, talking about they run too much to the left or whatever the case may be. I didn't talk about it on yesterday's rapid reaction. So let's talk about it now. It's Analytics Tuesday after all. So let's talk about some stats. So the Falcons wound up against Buffalo running 20 designed runs. They ran 9 times to the left, 8 times up the middle, and 3 times to the right. Their success rate overall in those 20 design runs was 70%. So again, that's one of the reasons I forgot what grade I gave the running offense, but it was a high grade, right? It was like a B or an A or something like that, something high. And that's why, because they were effectively able to run the football in this game. But running to the left, their success rate was 44%, which is solid, but not, incredible. Running up the middle, it was 88% on those 8 runs up the middle. And for the 3 times they ran to the right, it was 100% success rate. And that probably is partially owed to why Kayla McGary's run blocking grade was so high, because when they ran behind him, seemingly the rare times that they did that in this game, it seemed like he must have been nailing his blocks or whatever case may be. So we'll sort of see how that fares when I watch the film. So got a couple more interesting nuggets, 2 more to talk about on today's Analytics Tuesday episode. We're going to be talking about AJ Terrell being utilized as a shadow corner. We'll get into that, as well as another nugget is this weekend's Falcons Saints game has been moved to a 4:25 kickoff now. And that's now simultaneous with the Rams 49ers game that could also potentially have an impact on the Saints playoff fortunes, now that we know the Falcons are no longer in the playoff mix. And so the Saints fortunes are tied to the outcome of both of those games. They have to beat the Falcons, which they're favored by 4.5 points over. Then they also need the 49ers to lose, and the 49ers are 5-point underdogs to the Rams. And yet the 49ers are underdogs to a team that they've beaten 5 straight times. So will they make that 6, or will the Rams finally get that Kyle Shanahan-sized monkey off their back? You decide. But whatever you decide, make sure you head over to BetOnline.ag, the number one spot for all your sports betting action all season long. You can bet on those 2 games. You can also bet on the national championship game, where Georgia is a 3-point favorite over Alabama. But it's not just NFL and college football. It's NBA, NHL, boxing, UFC, all the way to your favorite Vegas casino games. Head over right now to BetOnline.ag and sign up with the promo code Locked On, and you'll get a 50% welcome bonus. That means if you deposit $300, you get $150 in free money to play with and bet on whatever games you like. So don't wait and take advantage of all the amazing offers available at BetOnline, where the game starts. So before we talk about AJ Terrell's, first game of the 2021 season, of the 2022 calendar year, as a shadow corner, I do want to remind you, in addition to heading over to betonline.ag, make sure you go check out the Locked On Bulldogs podcast to get the updates on all the things going on in that national championship game. Of course, Locked On Bulldogs should be your second listen, because we all know that Locked On Falcons is your first listen. And of course, Locked On Bulldogs is free and available on all the same podcast platforms. You can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So go check out Locked On Bulldogs. So AJ Terrell finished this Buffalo Bills game with one of his lowest graded games of the season, according to PFF. He gained a 60.3 overall grade and a 51.3 coverage grade, which was, in fact, the lowest coverage grade he's earned so far this season. And, maybe some of that's tied to the fact that he was being asked to shadow Stefon Diggs. According to PFF, all of AJ Terrell's targets found himself in coverage against Stefon Diggs. And when targeted 5 times covering Stefon Diggs, Diggs caught 3 passes for 24 yards, had no yards after catch, had 2 first downs. Terrell did break up 1 pass, and Diggs did drop one of those passes. And when you look at Diggs against everybody else that was asked to cover him throughout the game, Diggs caught 2 of 4 targets for 24 yards, had 10 yards after catch, and had 2 first downs. So it's interesting to see PFF ding AJ Terrell in that manner. Again, double check when I watch the film, but also looking at the PFF pre-snap positional charting, Terrell, it's notable how you can tell Terrell was shadowing Diggs quite a bit, was how often he was being moved all over the formation. Right. Traditionally, we have seen AJ Terrell park himself at that left cornerback spot. And if you look prior to this week, 93% of his snaps as a cornerback have been spent out wide at the left cornerback position. This week, it was only about 54% of his snaps. Against Buffalo, AJ Terrell spent 26% of his snaps at the right cornerback spot. But prior to this week, it was less than 1%. It's like 0.5% or 0.3% or something like that of his snaps playing on the right outside cornerback spot. And he spent more time in the slot this week as well, shadowing Stefon Diggs. 20% of his snaps against Buffalo came in the slot, while 7% in the first, 16 weeks of the regular season have been in the slot. So I'll obviously do my own charting when I do the film. And unlike pass rushing and pass protection, historically speaking, I'm not always keen on PFF's charting when it comes to coverage responsibilities. I think that's probably the wonkiest thing that they do. So generally, I won't sit here and say don't pay any attention to their coverage grades, because obviously if you do that, then you'll think AJ Terrell's been bad this year, because their coverage grades say he's been the best in the league and he's been outstanding this year. And I thought he played really well watching the game live against Stefon Diggs. We'll see what the film says. He got beat a couple of times, but that's the job. And it certainly was not like to the same degree that guys like Mike Evans and Mike Thomas were beating him last year. So we'll see what happens when I rewatch the film. But one of the things that I will do when we do our year-end positional reviews, when we get to the cornerback position, which at this rate probably at the very end of January, the very beginning of February, we'll see how it goes. But I'll look at Terrell's overall numbers, and we'll break down sort of what my charting says for Terrell's numbers, and we'll maybe potentially compare that to PFF's numbers to sort of see how different they are, because I've been charting defenses since 2019. So I have that information at my beck and call. But it was surprising to me that the Falcons decided to make AJ Terrell a shadow corner this week of all weeks, given all the turnover that they had due to the injury to Fabian Moreau, due to Richie Grant missing the entire week of practice. Richie Grant did play on Sunday, but played only a few snaps in the nickel or whatever the case may be. And so it was interesting for the Falcons to make that choice to go with AJ Terrell being a shadow corner, because, as Dean Pease has noted several times when asked this question over the last, 9 months or 12 months that he's been the DC here, is that when you use one player to shadow a guy, that means everybody else, at least at the cornerback position, is also going to have to shadow somebody. And so it's not just one guy shadowing, it's 3 guys shadowing, and you have to feel pretty good about all 3 of those guys shadowing. And given that, Darren Hall is a rookie and has been up and down as a rookie, and arguably their second most effective slot corner behind Richie Grant. And then Kendall Sheffield was basically getting his first real action of the season on defense this week as the right corner opposite AJ Terrell. It felt interesting that the Falcons chose to go in that direction, to throw that out there. Now, Kendall Sheffield is no stranger to shadow coverage because he did that a lot last year, particularly in those games last year where the Falcons did use AJ Terrell to shadow the other team's number one, and Kendall Sheffield was often responsible for that number two throughout the season last year. So it's not like something new to him, but you do wonder, given all the moving parts that you had in the secondary, that Dean Pease was making a fairly bold choice to go in that direction. Typically, in those situations where you have all these moving parts, you kind of want to dumb things down. And that was reflected in the Falcons playing, quite a bit of man coverage. We'll see what the film says exactly what that number is, but it was up compared to the last 3 weeks. We talked about that on a previous All 22 review, how much the Falcons had been relying on zone coverage in recent weeks. And they were playing a lot more man coverage compared to the last 3 weeks, at least based off of PFF numbers. And that's usually a sign of teams dumbing things down. But like shadowing means that you're throwing an extra wrinkle into that because now you got guys flip flopping sides potentially every other snap or whatever the case may be. And so you're not just basically like cover this one guy. You also have to cover this one guy on this side of the field. And you might have a slightly different responsibility, particularly if you're going to disguise and show man coverage pre-snap, but then actually play zone after the ball snapped or whatever. Is something that Dean Pease has often done when we go back and we look at some of those plays where AJ Terrell has moved from the left side of the field. It has been for that reason where the Falcons are making it seem like, oh, AJ Terrell's lined up in the slot, AJ Terrell's lined up at the right cornerback spot. They're definitely playing man coverage, and then the Falcons aren't playing man coverage. So that has been a frequent wrinkle that Dean Pease has utilized this week or throughout the season. And so it was just interesting that he made that choice for the Falcons to do that. But, I'm not complaining about it. Obviously, I think it was fairly effective at keeping Stefon Diggs in check. And it wasn't as if like other guys did I miss something? It wasn't like other guys really dominated the game, but part of that is owed to the Bills basically abandoning the run in the second half. So maybe it would have been different had the Bills stuck with that. But the Falcons were able to be effective in that. But it was interesting. And again, we'll see what the film says when I watch it myself, but it's interesting to see how much PFF dinged him for his man coverage. And that was one of the reasons why his grade was so low, because their grade for him when he was in man coverage was 28.9. So they gave him a really bad grade. And again, watching the game live, it didn't reflect that. So I'll be curious to see if there's some stuff on the film that shows up that I'm like, oh, this is why PFF dinged them or whatever the case may be. So that'll be interesting to see. And that will be the last interesting thing we bring up on today's Analytics Tuesday episode of the podcast. Tomorrow, we will have Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com as our first guest of 2022. We got to ring in the new year in a great way by bringing Tori back on the show. And Tori will be talking with us about this Bills game as well as this season, this final week of the season. So we'll get her thoughts on that. So that means we won't be doing the usual all 22 review and Q&A for tomorrow. We'll probably punt the Q&A till Friday, like we did last week. As far as the all 22 review, if there's something really pressing that I'm dying to talk about, we can potentially talk about that on Friday. Obviously, Thursday will be the crossover with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints to preview this Week 18 matchup. But if there isn't anything that I'm dying to talk about from the Bills Week 17 film, we can potentially punt that and maybe roll that into, potentially the all 22 review for the Saints game or whatever, and compare and contrast, what the film against the Bills showed and what the film against the Saints showed. But talked about some of those issues potentially that I'll be paying attention to. So if I discover anything, about AJ Terrell or the offensive line or anything like that, I will certainly, bring it up on Friday's episode. But if you want to send in your questions to be answered on Friday's episode, because we will be doing the Q&A at that point in time. Of course, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And, that's going to do it for us here on Locked On Falcons. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to check out another show in addition to Locked On Falcons for your second listen of the day, whether that's Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks, or Locked On Braves. But also make sure you check out Locked On Bets, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, his blowout specials, and of course, Lee's lock of the day to help you get some extra money in your pocket when you go visit BetOnline.ag and use that promo code locked on for that 50% welcome bonus. So check out Locked On Bets because Lee's giving you those daily picks, what not to put money in your pocket. That money, in addition to the money that's going to go in your pocket when you sign up for the Get Upside ad. Oh, we're it's what's the called? It's an S word. I can't think of the word. We're all cohesive, whatever that word is. I'm blanking on it. Sorry, guys. Don't don't try to be clever live on at the end of a podcast when your brain is dying from spending the last 35 minutes talking. So whatever that word is, you guys know what you're yelling it at your phone. And I'll think of it the minute I go off the air. But go sign up for all those things basically and listen to Locked On Bets is basically the point I was trying to make. So go check that out, guys. Appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com. Appreciate it. Till then.